Greetings, this is Renata Almanzor, trying to cover a couple of topics in this video lecture, PowerPoint. The topic is stakeholder identification and SWOT, and I am going to touch a bit upon the strategic priorities that's really for this week as well. So I'm going to encourage you to read both chapters 3 and 4 as well as start moving towards 5 in the text. So just to go through quickly, I will also touch upon the assignments, what I think will be helpful for the assignment as well. So as another way, a lot of what I want to do in this course and lectures isn't just talk straight from the lecture. I'm also offering another perspective that I think would be helpful or should be helpful in having you deepen and broaden your understanding of strategic planning and forecasting. Another way to think of strategic planning, while I talked about the steps earlier, is really the movement towards answering 4 critical questions. The questions around identity, the environment or context in which an organization exists, the direction in which it's going, and how it will get there, right? So when I'm talking about identity, it's why does the organization exist? Being able to clarify vision, mission, and values. And then the environment, what should be the major work of the organization, right? So given that there is a calling or a need for the organization in one's context, what should be then the major work of that organization? And when we talk about direction, it's how will the work be done? You know, what's the staffing? What's the revenue strategy? How are we going to actually specifically name the goals and tactics that we will work towards? And then the planning, right? So a vision without a plan is simply a hallucination, as Thomas Edison has suggested. So as we think about years out, I tend to, at this point, work with organizations that only plan about 3 to 5 years out. Nothing more than that would be just problematic, actually. But within that planning, naming what the benchmarks and accountability mechanisms that would exist so that folks know to what extent they're making some progress. So putting that in a nutshell, right? So I think the 4 planning elements, again, is answering a number of questions from those 4 questions that I named earlier. The identity questions, again, are answering values, vision, and mission and vision questions. The environment is talking about the internal environment as well as external. You know, what are our strengths and weaknesses? And then going forward, what are our ways to address whatever obstacles or barriers that may be facing us? And then the specific planning, how will we prioritize what happens in the next year or 2, as well as what we think will happen by year 3, and how will we know that we're in making that direction? So for this class, I'm asking you to do a lot of this, but really I've asked you to kind of identify it with respect to the corporate level, the business level, as well as the functional level. Hopefully these questions can be answered, or you see how they can be answered even at the programmatic level, the functional level. So I know folks were asking specifically, how do I know? I think I'm doing more functional level strategy than business level strategy. Either way, these questions should be able to be answered at all 3 levels. And I'm going to give another framework to kind of complement that in just a moment. But what I wanted to first do is kind of share even another stance to strategic planning, or a strategic approach to planning, and that's coming out of the Stanford Design School. And it's called design thinking or human-centered design. And what they often do, and they don't use this necessarily for strategic plan, they use this for actually more program planning. But I really like the approach in that it follows one, and while this is being explained linearly, it really is much more of a cycle in that one empathizes, being able to truly understand what's going on, what's the experience of the constituents, to be able to say what are the challenges that they may be facing, or the programmatic uses of the tools and resources that they have at hand. And then from that, to be able to ideate or brainstorm what are other ways that we might be able to go, or better ways that we might be able to go, and then just prototype, create some possible solutions that we can test, and then go forward. So as you can see, it's really similar to just any strategic planning process, where the first one is really about identity, but the second step is around understanding the environment through research, and then from that research, stating a direction in which you'll be heading, In other words, solutions to the challenges that you'll be facing, and then creating a plan from that. So that's another approach that I'll go even more so in just a moment. But the other way I wanted to kind of lift up for you is strategic planning. I think when we're talking about strategic planning, it really is about organizational change. And for me, change is an inquiry cycle. And at its simplest is being able to kind of reflect on what are we doing, and what are we doing, what does what we're doing say about how we're believing or theorizing about ways to go. This is another cycle of inquiry, which in a lot of ways is very similar to a strategic planning process, right? Where you understand, starting with number one, assess our current reality. That leads to some questions about how do we want to be, and understanding why we are the way we are, and getting to some key problems. So you'll see here just a number of questions that we're really putting before you that you can ask yourself as you're coming up with your own SWOT analysis. But even from the initial root question, cause or problem, the why answers you may receive, is then from there creating a theory of action or a theory of change. A what if kind of statement. If we do this, then this happens, so that we get to these results, right? Our effort, effect, and results. And from there, if we have a particular theory, we can start identifying some goals and then have a plan to do that. Again, you can see this is just even another process that's all very similar to strategic planning in general. And put another way, there are three types of inquiry that exists for an organization. One at the organizational level, like what are the patterns of our organization? One at the team or group level. And what about at the individual level or the practitioner level? Again, for many of you who are doing more functional level strategies, I think the collaborative and practitioner inquiry would be the way to understand what is going on for you and your constituents, and how you might want to be able to address those challenges that they're facing. So to go forth, though, it's important to not ignore what you might already know. So whatever level of inquiry that you might be approaching, I think it's important to start with recognizing what do you know about what people want or need, what are the technologies that you believe can help, and even if these are speculations or things you want to seek out to confirm. But I don't ever want to say that you are a blank slate and that you are ignorant, actually, of whatever you might be facing. And while you can approach it with humility, it's also approaching it with the competence and confidence that you already have about, even if it's a sense, an intuition. So being able to balance your intuition with evidence that you'll be gathering along the way. So I do think at some point, even before you start gathering data around what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, even if you name for yourself what you believe are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the particular folks, the people, the technologies, and on and on. And then once you kind of have that kind of data, then you can be able to say, what don't you know and need to learn about the area of investigation, such as, well, what do these folks feel? You might know something about your programming area, but some of your partners, you might not know anything about what their perspective is. So it's going to be important to kind of name them as someone to chat with whom to chat. How do they value what's going on? What may be their future needs? And what are the challenges to implementing whatever solutions you might come up with? And once you have those kinds of questions, then it's really important to identify different people with whom to speak. It's not gonna, and I think it's important, again, sometimes we know who are the folks that might be on our side, but it's really important to be able to identify those folks who have extreme points of views from us, or might even be resistant to changing. And then, so I like to kind of set it up in a third sort of way, right? A third of those who are opposite and extreme, and those who are resistant or new to something, and then somewhere in between, the quote-unquote more average folks. I think I have this slide again twice. And then once you identify those folks with whom you want to speak, then you start to identify and choose research methods, right? Again, this isn't a research class, and my guess is you've had some of this already. But just know, even in most of the times when I'm doing a strategic planning process, I do a combination of all of these actually, in context immersion, and many of you are working within your own organization and own programming. But the purpose of these methods, is to be able to have these kinds of outputs, right? People's stories, observations of their reality, and a deeper understanding of their needs, barriers, and their constraints. Either way, whatever way you choose, I think it's important to be able to develop your mindset. I love this quote by R.U. Suzuki, where he says that in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, and the expert's mind there are few. So it's really important to develop a beginner's mind, again, one with great humility, that while you might know some stuff, you also need to approach it knowing that you can learn. And even as you're gathering information, being able to make the distinction between what you're actually observing and what you're interpreting. And sometimes it's going to be, and that's another challenge that I think often happens with data collection and research, especially strategic planning that's happening in such a short time frame, that people move so quickly from interpretation to evaluation, even before naming what is it that I'm looking at, what does the data actually say, without putting any meaning to it. But once you have that meaning, just to get really specific then, make that meaning, it's really important to look at the data in its entirety, to extract insights, find themes, and then what I tend to do is create frameworks and often visually represent the system as I understand it. And so to go even further then, it's being able to make even more meaning, right? Being able to start to say, what do I think from this data are the emerging strategic priorities or needs of those with whom I'm working? And then be also open to the idea that there may be really a number of solutions. This is the point where you start to say, take your own stance, again, with not with certainty, but with a good questioning, your beginner's mind. Being able to say, what do you think now is most important? And you might need to test that out. What do you believe to be the worth or cost of some of these initial priorities? And what do you think then are the incentives for folks to want to address these strategic priorities, but what are also the challenges or barriers that exist from there? So going forward, hopefully this gives you a little bit more context for how it is that you're going to approach your strategic strategy worksheet. Really, I'm asking you to think about what are the ways that you're gathering data, as well as what are you making meaning, or how are you making meaning of that data. And then from that, what do you believe are some of the emerging priorities? Again, you may have already started some of your implementing programs, and that's perfectly fine to be able to say, what would be the rationale that you can use from data that says, this is why we're implementing it in this way. The more that you can draw from data to be empirically creative, the better. So again, in this next week, I'm going to send out or post some times that I'm available for some 15 to 30 minute chats that I hope people can sign up for. I'm really hoping that I can talk to everybody in this next week, even though honestly it'll be a really challenging for me time, for all of us, I'm sure, but let's try to find some time that we can chatting, see if we can get on board. And then at that point, I will work with you to start thinking about how to do this capability assessment that I will have you turn into me in the latter part of the worksheet in a couple weeks. All right, take care.